This is Scott McIntyre, and this is the Anti-Intellectual Intellectual Podcast. And I have to use one of my favorite quotes from a movie. One thing about intellectuals, they prove that you can be absolutely brilliant and have no idea what's going on. And that's the point of my podcast, to try to debunk some of the things that intellectual scientists tell the public that may not be so. And so today we're going to look at errors in probabilistic thinking, and we're going to start off with being struck by lightning. What are the chances? Well, it's important that we know, because every other behavior we engage in life is compared to being struck by lightning. You can insert any kind of behavior, and it will always be you're more likely to be struck by lightning than eaten by a shark, die in an airplane crash, or win the lottery. So it seems important then that if lightning is compared, the probability of being struck by lightning is compared to all these other events, that we should kind of know, well, how do they calculate that probability? How reliable is that probability, since that's the thing everything else is compared to? Well, you're not a scientist, so you probably assume that being struck by lightning might have something to do with how electrical current is conducted, and you're being part of some circuit in that case. But that would be wrong. Um, Simply divide the total population of whatever country you're in. In the United States, it's 330 million. By the total number of people struck by lightning per year, that's about 270, and you come up with your probability of being struck by lightning. And of course, we have the government intellectuals have already performed these calculations for us, so we don't need to worry about it. The National Weather Service tells us that your chances of being struck by lightning in any given year is basically 1 in a million. And in your lifetime, if you figure an 80-year lifetime, it's 1 in 15,000. Okay, should we trust those statistics? And let's follow that logic through. So if the probability of being struck by lightning is hinges on the population, if you're inside alone on a clear day, but everyone else leaves the country, then what are your chances of being struck by lightning? Would it be greater than somebody standing on a bald mountaintop hugging a 50-foot metal pole during a raging electrical storm, but on a continent that contains another 330 million people? Well, fortunately, no one really believes that statistic. It's a throwaway line. It's a 1 in a million chance, but everything else is compared to it. So why are we comparing all these other behaviors to something that isn't really accurate? Doesn't make any sense. I've never seen the advice from the National Weather Service: if a lightning storm is approaching, you can stay outside, but move to an area with a high concentration of people to lessen your odds of being struck. The problem with this statistic is it suffers from the same flaw incorporated into many other calculations of probability: sampling bias. It's ironic that supposedly smart people so regularly make this mistake when it's one of the cardinal sins taught to all scientists in their undergraduate education. So the errors in probabilistic thinking are on the part of the scientists, not us regular humans. Sampling bias is the problem. What does that mean? Scientists are cautioned to never infer the results of some study to a population from which the sample does not represent. For example, you would never infer the probability of supervised 8-year-olds that can swim drowning in pools from drownings of unsupervised children under 5 that can't swim, obviously. No one would ever do that, right? Stay tuned. They are brilliant. In the lightning case, it makes no sense to assume those struck by lightning were randomly sampled from the population and therefore are representative of the population and you. Instead, they self-selected into the sample of those struck by lightning by, at a minimum, one, engaging in specific behaviors like being outside and under specific conditions during a lightning storm. It seems more reasonable to calculate the probability of being struck by lightning from the population of those engaging in those behaviors under those certain conditions who were then struck by lightning. But that's hard, so we might not want to do that. Well, what about shark attacks? Are you more likely to be bitten by a shark than be struck by lightning? Well, don't worry about it. You're more likely to be struck by lightning, unless you live in Florida. Then you might have a better chance of being eaten by a shark, or at least attacked by a shark. How do we know? Well, fortunately, again, those intellectuals have done the calculations for us. What are your chances of a shark attack? One in almost 4 million, whereas in lightning, it's one in almost 80,000. Now, that's your chance of dying in a lifetime from one of those instances. And don't bother with the fact that that lightning statistic, 1 in 80,000, is nothing like the one we saw earlier where it was 1 in 15,000. I'm sure they know what they're doing. Well, how do you calculate that risk of shark attack? Well, they mention lifetime risk is calculated by, once again, dividing the entire population by the number of deaths divided by some number of life expectancy, and therefore we come up with the 1 in 3,748,067. Seems perfectly reasonable to count the entire population when calculating the probability of a shark attack. Brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. Intellectuals often define rational behavior by how well it matches probability calculations. This idea is so bad it's not even wrong, to misuse a quote from psychologist Leon Festinger. If we define rational as adhering to specific probability calculations, then yes, humans are irrational. However, those intellectuals are wrong in two ways. One, their probability calculations are often flawed due to sampling bias. And two, even if their probability calculations were correct, human and animal rationality is better judged by how payoffs and costs afford survival rather than accurate probability calculation. I'm not claiming to have the accurate probability calculations for any event. I'm simply pointing out the all too common error of sampling bias that is happening in these probability calculations. I'm really not even that interested in probability calculations because, as I will show in later podcasts, humans and animals discount or ignore probability in favor of cost and payoff considerations. And yes, they're probably smarter and more rational for it. You might say we follow the Forrest Gump definition of rationality. Stupid is as stupid does. Or to use a borrowed golf analogy, the measure of a golfer is not the way the club is gripped, the symmetry of the backswing, the way the club strikes the ball, or the follow through. It's where the ball lands. Scientists have won Nobel Prizes and made millions arguing humans are not rational based solely on human failing to conform their decision to specific probability calculations. Our form is all wrong, they insist. You non-intellectuals are incapable of understanding the error of your ways. You can't do the math. Future podcasts will address the erroneous claims by intellectuals, including those from the Freakonomics podcast, who I've been debunking in my classroom for over a decade. These include claims about whether you should let your child play at home with guns rather than a pool home. Is it safer to fly than drive? Is it stupid to play the lottery? Humans are irrational if they make decisions that ignore probability. Are those things true? For now, let the brilliant scientists who know the probabilities of being struck by lightning or eaten by a shark are near zero dance in the lightning storms and swim erratically in murky shark-infested waters. We irrational humans will go inside or watch from the shore, and we'll all be better off.